Our friends with ABC News, Pierre Thomas and J-Dog. I don't know if years ago you remember, I think it was a Bruce Willis film where the hacker got into a major utility and, even the traffic lights in cities were all messed up and there were traffic jams everywhere. So this cyber attack on the utilities is kind of a real concern. But no, that was with Richard Gere when he plays the goes after him. But it was a movie about I think it was in Washington or New York, but it was a cyber attack on a major utility up in like New York State or something, but affected cities. And all these UFO sightings as well recently. I don't know if you've seen. There's been a much more of them. All this stuff has been in movies, right? 2015, 20 years ago. It's all the movies preview the reality. All right. Good morning. It is a Tuesday morning. J-Dog, we do have a pretty crisp. It cooled off yesterday after mild Monday. Today we're looking at a crisp, cool Tuesday. Not a bad looking day right now as we get going. Hope you're having a good start to it. A lot going on. Well, the latest on, I guess they're trying to negotiate another day or two more of the truce between Israel and Hamas to get more hostages released. Of course, no Americans yet. I think there are 9 Americans being held by the terrorist group or Hamas, and in exchange for Palestinians being held by Israelis. So the exchange has been going on, but no Americans yet, I believe. But we'll see. And of course, analysts will have some of those today talking about the Hamas might be holding on to Americans because they might be the most valuable hostages in their minds on the global side of things. Presidential primary side of things, Nikki Haley coming into New Hampshire this week, and more activity is a lot of the inside eyes, believe it or not, are on Governor Chris Sununu here in New Hampshire. Now that Thanksgiving is come and gone, and we're getting into December at the end of the week, could this be the week? Will Governor Sununu make an endorsement? And it could come at any time. It could not be this week. Could be next week. He may not make one, but I think he will. He was on with us a week ago today when we did our 15th anniversary of our state police segment at Auto Fair Honda in Manchester, and the governor was very upbeat about the possibility of the likelihood of him jumping in with an endorsement. Now, typically endorsements don't matter. Typically, they don't matter. But in Iowa, certainly Ron DeSantis is hoping they matter a whole heck of a lot. And here in New Hampshire, it's interesting. Good friend of mine, Mike Griffin, had just sent a note from the Seacoast Online, and I'd heard about this recently. Judd Gregg, former U.S. Senator, making an endorsement of Nikki Haley. And Nikki Haley's, especially in the Seacoast side of things, seems like her signs and campaign of the ground game seem to be picking up. It's interesting. We're going to bring in our regular experts and analyst, Neil Levesque, joining us in a moment. St. Anselm College Institute of Politics, one of our tremendous partners out there. But the analysts are the insiders, if you will. It's kind of like the NFL. It's kind of like the National Football League. What do they really know? But anyway, Neil's not one of them. He knows. But I think before I bring in Neil, I think that the tee-up or the setup that I hear is this. Governor Sununu, I think, from what I'm hearing, would probably, if he had his preference, would endorse Ron DeSantis, Governor DeSantis of Florida. I think the concern the governor has is DeSantis and DeSantis' camp seem to be putting a lot of stock in Iowa, physically in Iowa. I think the question Sununu probably has is the Florida governor going to be as committed to a ground game in New Hampshire? One of the key phrases Governor Sununu said last week on my show, when I asked him this about after the holiday, Thanksgiving, is he going to jump in and endorse one of the governors, Haley, DeSantis, or Christie? He said, yes, it would be a governor, and you could see in his face he wants to do this. And he feels that the Trump lead is catchable, that he thinks he can trip up Trump in New Hampshire. I think Nikki Haley is probably the more likely choice for Sununu because her time in New Hampshire and her ground game seems to be showing up. And that's a term that Sununu used last week. He said it's going to have a ground game to beat Trump here, a real ground game, active ground game. And you don't have that much time. You really just have, a few weeks now between now and the end of the year, and then a few weeks, and then the primary January 23rd. Neil Levesque, Institute of Politics, one of our political analysts and All-Stars Live. Good morning, New Hampshire, the pulse of an age. Good morning, Mr. Neil. Well, you just heard some of that. What do you think? Yeah. Well, the difference the difference I see though with Sununu is he really lights up when he can go out there and kind of have that sarcastic Trump barbs, go at the former president because there's no love lost there. And it's interesting if Sununu actually jumps into this, which I think he will, could be this week, and he starts making some waves. Imagine the back and forth between former President Donald Trump with the lead here and the sitting governor Chris Sununu. Imagine those volleys. Yep. Right. Well, Neil, I think even because polls are a snapshot and reflection, I think perception creates a lot of reality. I've noticed that in life. If people perceive a team as good and they have some momentum, it helps them win. Perception can create a lot. I think the perception is going to be interesting in the next few weeks before now and the end of the year, and then the few week window after New Year's because there's not much time here. That's why I think Governor Sununu. You heard it here. I'm not. You're someone I should be pressing, but I'm going to say I think it feels like Governor Sununu is going to jump in this week. It just feels like it. And it might just be a little tweet, might just be a little social media. I'm with so-and-so, or he might come out swinging with that person when they're in the state. But I guess my point is, if the perception here, the perception to voters is Trump is absolutely unstoppable. He's the one. Well, it might keep some people inactive or independents not getting involved. But if the perception is one candidate is moving, really moving, the perception is that candidate has a chance. Well, all of a sudden, it creates a reality that candidate has a chance. Yeah. 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 It's interesting. Yesterday we had Anna Brown, Citizens Count, talking about the governor's race here, which not getting a lot of attention on the Democrat side. Cindy Warmington, as you know, is an executive counselor. And Anna was making the point tomorrow is the governor is an executive council meeting, and Planned Parenthood or funding for Planned Parenthood, a couple of the items certainly going to maybe spark something with Cindy Warmington sort of jumping on that as an issue, which probably won't pass given the makeup of the council, 4-1 Republican. Yeah. All right, Neil, we'll keep an eye on it. Neil Vec, Institute of Politics, St. Anselm College. Thank you, Neil. All right, going to take a quick break. Good morning, New Hampshire, powered by GMI Asphalt and Paving. Call Christine at the company or simply text PAVE, P-A-V-E, to 78,000 now. Great job opportunities, great company, great benefits. And when we come back, our own White House correspondent, John Decker, and remembering a former First Lady yesterday back on Good Morning New Hampshire, the Pulse of an Age, beyond 107.7 FM Manchester, Concord, beyond WEMJ 107.3 FM 1490 AM and FM WEMJ Lakes Region Laconia, beyond WTSN Seacoast of New Hampshire up into Portland, Maine 1270 AM 98.1 FM. Of course, WASR AM and FM. The Pulse of an Age. Good Morning New Hampshire 9 to noon. Jack Heath back in a moment. All right, welcome back, John Decker, our own White House correspondent, on a nice Tuesday morning. Good morning, John. And I just think the Carter's story and the former First Lady, but what a story, what a couple. I mean, you think about what they've done, what they did post, and of course, New Hampshire's primary, Jimmy Carter, right, the governor from Georgia, but the former First Lady. And yesterday, I know you were covering this, I believe, but just what they did post White House is amazing to me as a couple. Yeah. And, I just think, I don't know, of course, that was before my time in New Hampshire, but Jimmy Carter, New Hampshire's primary, this is why there's an irony with the current DNC ignoring New Hampshire and Joe Biden. It really was perfect for someone like a Jimmy Carter. No one knew who he was when he came here. I mean, some of the early campaign stops, who is this peanut farmer from Georgia? But the Carters always were able to emit or broadcast, whether it was 100% real or not, a very genuine humility. And I think that's what's sort of missing in today's politics sometimes. And I just think they just didn't have an air about them, even if it wasn't 100% genuine. I don't really know. I mean, you look at net worth and all that, I'm sure, but he always came across as, wearing jeans, the two of them out there working on Habitat for Humanity or doing something to help others. And I just think it was a great message. And I think people have to acknowledge, I mean, just what wonderful couple. Which is amazing, which is amazing. I mean, yeah. All right, John Decker, our own White House correspondent. Thank you, John. Make it a good one. All right, and again, I just think, I do. I mean, it's amazing. People don't think of this sometimes in context or perspective. You know, we haven't had that many presidents, and history is still being made. It seems with each election. And who knows where this one's going to go? Seriously, I sit here today, 28 days into November, been doing this a while in terms of watching presidential primaries really take shape up here. And this one's different. This one's bizarre because you have the Democrats, the Democrat National Committee, and the incumbent Joe Biden basically screwing over New Hampshire, not wanting to take part in the early states and sort of starting this thing in South Carolina, changing the schedule, kind of anointing and changing the whole process of running for president. And I understand that Joe Biden didn't do terribly well here in 2020. He's run a few times, and I get all that. But my point is, you look at our primary coming up after the Iowa caucus, and it does really kickstart, certainly among the Republicans who are really running here with real votes in the primary in Tuesday, January 23rd. Whether it's not as big of a primary because you don't have the incumbent Democrat running here, you do have Congressman Phillips, Marianne Williamson, and others. Well, there's people you haven't even heard of that are on the ballot. But in terms of the major candidates, it will be a Republican real watershed test of Donald Trump. New Hampshire's primary, I would argue, more than the Iowa caucus. I think New Hampshire's primary, I've said this, you've heard me say this more than once. I think Donald Trump, because the story for months, not weeks, months, has been Trump has a big lead in New Hampshire. He'll put out his his own releases whenever there's an Emerson College or a poll. Trump has a huge lead in New Hampshire. Now, that's good if it's real. And polls are a little bit like saying that let's just say the Chiefs and the Eagles, they just had a rematch a week or so ago in the NFL. Let's just say the early polls going into if it's a rematch, are the Chiefs have a 28 point, and not going to be that much, but a 28 point, they're favored to beat the Eagles again. Well, that has nothing to do with the score. The score is the real vote on January 23rd. And if there's anything but a big Trump win in New Hampshire, it becomes a huge story. In other words, if Trump wins by, and the number I put to it, because a win's a win, it's got to be 10 points. If anyone's within single digits to Trump after this big 30-point plus lead, then the story is going to be who's the comeback kid, who came in second in New Hampshire, and then we'll go on. But if Trump trounces the field here, if he trounces everyone, well, then this is his nomination. I mean, I'm just telling you the way it is. Like it or not, Trump will be the nominee for Republicans. But if the only state that could trip him up, literally trip him up, is probably New Hampshire. And you have a New Hampshire governor who would love nothing more than to do just that. Chris Sununu would love to play that role in New Hampshire and American political history, much like his dad, Governor John Sununu Sr., did when the late George Bush Sr. stumbled out of Iowa, and Sununu at the time, his father was the governor, and kind of delivered the vice president to become the nominee to win New Hampshire and go on to win. And of course, Sununu Sr. ended up becoming White House chief of staff for George Bush Sr. So the younger Sununu governor looks at history, I'm sure. You have a few weeks to go before the end of the year, and in a few weeks before the primary. The question is, can Sununu jump into this race, endorse someone, and really work it so that they start catching Trump? I don't know if it's possible. I really don't. Trump, it looks like if you're a betting person, you're going to say Trump has this primary and the nomination locked up. That's what it looks like. But again, we'll see, and not much time to see. Some commentary, 603-228-2080. We come back, more of some of the other news talk and some of the other stories making news on this Tuesday, top of the 10 o'clock. We're going to hear from one of the presidential candidates, Ryan Binkley out of Texas. He's doing well in Iowa. Back on the Pulse of an H in a moment. Yeah, it's Senator. All right, we are back, and boy, it's welcome in December this week, J-Dog. Unbelievable. Really pretty interesting. All right, It's hard to believe too, despite all the noise and people get tired of it. Trust me, I get it. I get it. We still haven't heard the end of Hunter Biden's business stuff. That's up before the House. That's up before the House coming up. And we'll see where all that goes because I'm not sure looking ahead here. It's also, I think it's hard to assess what are the moods of most American, not people that are, I don't know, because there's all kinds of craziness out there and that's unfortunate or divisiveness. But what are the moods of most people? I think the moods of most people are, despite the economists that tell you inflation's getting better, I think most of us don't feel that. Whenever we go out, everything seems expensive. And arguably some of it is unnecessarily expensive just because people can get it. I'm just pointing that out. I think sometimes prices of charges, they'll pay it. But I don't know about you. Every time I go to the grocery store, I'm just looking at prices and I never used to. It just seems like it's so I think most people are looking at the cost of everything. The only good news I've noticed lately, and it has nothing to do with the current administration's policies on energy, is that the price of gas, regular gas, when you go out, I've noticed, there's another story that no one's talked about. You notice how the whole electric vehicle industry has taken a big back seat, no pun intended. It's sort of like, hit some roadblocks, people aren't going to be able to afford vehicles over $100,000. They get a couple hundred miles on a charge. Okay. Or the battery cost a lot more than I thought when it goes, or all these things that even though it sounds good and it feels good. So I'm not even going to dignify the discussion on where the real toxins and pollutants are when it comes to making vehicles. If you even knew the effect in the environment from making electric vehicles and lithium and different materials to make the batteries, you'd have a whole different view on electric. But the feeling was because it's not fossil fuel, you're doing something really, really cool. But if you notice how that industry is taking a hit. So the only good news lately is the price of regular gasoline has come down. I went by one place this morning. It was like $3.05, like $3.02 a gallon. Just about a month or two ago, it was up near $4. So that's maybe one thing. But everything else seems to be really feeling like expensive. And then people's salary is hard to keep up with inflation. So that's, the take home, the budgets are still being strained. Utilities, nothing's cheap. Nothing is cheap. And I think people really I think most people are struggling paycheck to paycheck. Small business owners just trying to keep everything going. And the funny thing, it's not funny, but I don't think anyone really knows with any clarity or clairvoyance where it's going. A year from now, what are interest rates going to be if you're going to borrow money to buy a house? A year from now, what are, as we go into the towards the end of 2024, what are interest rates? What's the economy going to look like? I'll tell you one thing that I just can't understand, and both parties are to blame, by the way, in Washington, both parties are to blame, is our national debt. And you look at how we're running Congress, the national debt, it's got to be closer to $34 trillion than 33. They manufacture these looming government showdowns or shutdown showdowns every 4 to 6 weeks, it seems, and they just keep passing spending measures. And not one party that I notice or has the discipline or the ability to look the American people in the eye and say, we need to cut federal spending. This is where we can cut. I've said this before, but and I will say this, the new speaker is probably more gifted at public speaking than any speaker I've seen in a long time, or maybe any figure in Washington, because number one, he can speak and finish his sentences and he knows where he is. I'm being serious. I mean, it's like the nursing home fact. It's like the high-end nursing home down there in Washington these days with members of the Senate or the current president. But the new House Speaker is pretty good at speaking. And I don't know why, seriously, they don't take the Ross Perot playbook and just take that easel and have a press conference and just put the national debt up top and just explain what it cost every American, what this is costing you and why it is with inflation, why it's hurting you and your family. And this is what we need to do to cut spending based on money coming in, revenue, taxation, and other revenues. This is what we need to do to bring the debt down. This is how we can do it. And Pro used to be good at that. It's ironic we're coming into a presidential cycle. He used to get up there with his with his whiteboard and his marker and say, now see here, and he made it just like a business math lesson, and he'd write it out. I know everything's digitized today, but if you just did the old whiteboard with 3 or 4 key points up there to tell the American people and people in Congress, this is a problem. This is why it's a problem. This is how we solve it. I mean, I've had people who are really successful at business tell me that don't complicate business. You have a real business when you can identify a problem and you have a solution and you get paid for that solution. So you have a problem. It's the debt. This is why it's a problem, because it's hurting you, people, families out there. It's what it cost you and your household. And this is how we solve it and can bring it down. And we're going to cut here. We're going to cut here. We're going to cut here. And you can cut. And I always laugh with even some of our regular contributors. They'll say, well, you can't talk about budget cuts when you're facing a government shutdown. Well, when the heck else can you talk about it? When is everyone going to be serious if we can't talk about it? When are we going to talk about budget cuts? They don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. And I'll tell you right now, one thing we could do to send a real strong message to the markets, in my opinion, and to households in America, is start dealing with that debt and stop giving me excuses. And by the way, I love the one that no one talks about. This is the stuff that gets me going, if you want to know how I think. We have this inflation, the worst in half a century. Where did it come from? Where did it come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from Washington, D.C. with too much federal spending, too fast in the economy. There was so much excessive COVID spending and COVID benefits and more COVID stuff and more federal money, trillions of dollars poured in the economy, too much money chasing too few goods. And it sparked the fire of inflation that we can't put out. It's that simple. They created it. And now all of a sudden they tell us as consumers, we're not spending enough or whatever. So the point is, if you don't think we can't cut spending at a federal level, well, you're out of your mind. We absolutely can, and we need to, because it's not sustainable. People aren't even telling younger people, where they're still taking money out of their Social Security checks, we don't even know if we can afford this in 30 years, because no one will have a discussion because everyone's so afraid of not getting reelected. We talk about a stupid political system sometimes. Seriously. The whole motivation of success in politics in Washington is getting reelected and getting reelected and getting reelected and holding your office and becoming a powerful incumbent like Mitch McConnell or Schumer. But to me, that's nauseating. You should be more of an entrepreneur. Go down there, shake it up, look at how you can be more innovative. Do you know? Okay, here's another one for you, kind of an on a roll Tuesday. Do you know that most federal agencies, the people at the top, are not incentivized to run it like a business and save money? Do you know that there's no reward? I mean, if you're head of the VA nationally, or you're head of the Department of Agriculture or Education or Energy, there's no reward if you're that cabinet member to say, I saved 10% in our operations this year through attrition and cutting back on unnecessary programs. They don't want you to do that. They want you to spend every nickel and penny of that budget and come back for more. There's no incentive to run any agency or department in Washington like a business. None whatsoever. But we have to do that. We have to do that. There's no incentive to cut spending. And it just keeps going. And it's not sustainable. And why we don't talk about it? You know why? It's not popular, because if you say you're going to cut something, they say, oh, you're against this. If you're going to cut the Department of Agriculture, you're against animals. If you're going to cut the Department of Federal Education, you're against kids and students. If you're going to cut energy, whatever, you see where I'm going? No one has the you know what, but yet we out here are expected to live within our means, balance our household budgets, pay our bills, balance state budgets, but it's void. It's like alien speak in Washington. And it's got to change, and someone's going to stand up and change it. And maybe it's going to come from the top. I don't know. Some commentary. 603-228-2080. Also, as we get going, we're in that time. I didn't really catch what the totals were yesterday on Cyber Monday. I heard this morning that our TSA folks said that on was it Sunday's air flights, 2.9 million people flying, like most ever. American Airlines said they had more people than they've ever had on the airlines. So some of these holiday numbers are out. Cyber Monday, I guess people were doing all that. And today's, giving, what is it called, J-Doc, today? Giving Tuesday. So it's always good to give, but I'm not going to push you today, in all honesty, because we've done a lot and we do a lot through our caring and sharing a few weeks back, where we raised tens of thousands for our 26 food pantries and charities out there. We recently asked you to make a difference on a few other fronts. So do what you can, as they say. And it makes a real difference. Take a quick break on a nice looking Tuesday. By the way, J Doc, I didn't talk about it because we were on the football roll yesterday. What is going on? Boston Bruins. This is like to the Blue Jackets of Columbus. I know on any given, but you know what? Come on, let's go. I don't know what they do now. I guess yeah, but they got to shake up the lines, I think, or something. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play the Pulse of an H. Reminder, in a few weeks, Tenny Mountain, right in the center and heart of New Hampshire, not far from the campus of Plymouth State University. Tenny Mountain will be fully open for skiing before the Christmas break. They haven't been fully open for skiing in a while, and they're going big now. And then the official ski area of Good Morning New Hampshire, the Pulse of an H, on the Pulse of an H. So we'll be keeping an eye on that with some snow reports as we get closer. We'll take a quick break on Good Morning New Hampshire. Back in a moment. That's it. That's not much. Usually, you tell us about your favorite pie. Really? It's never over. Nothing out of the Patriots. We won't even talk about them. Okay, it's been a day. By the way, yeah, the Bears, was it 12-10? They beat the 12. I think it was 12-10. They beat the Vikings. Well, look at the Giants the other night. That wasn't much better. Patriots was a terrible game. What? Rolf Bernershka? Remember him? Way back. Hey, no, and Dempsey, who's the guy? I remember. What'd you just say about place kickers? Can you repeat that? I mean, field goal kicker. What'd you say? Paint your house and buy you a Snickers? Hey, they win a lot of games. What? It's part of the game, a field goal. 52-yard kick at 2 seconds left. Paint your house and buy me a Snickers? Where do you get that from? But there's nothing better than a good one who's got like a 90, like the one we got rid of might have gotten the kick. Folk might have gotten that the other night, by the way. I'm just saying. Why did they get rid of him, by the way? So paint my house and get me a Snickers? It's interesting. It's funny you point out the running back thing in the NFL because you look at the if you ever looked at film or the tapes, as they say, of not too long ago, it was a running game. I mean, if really Joe Willie Namath in that first, that Super Bowl started throwing. Who's this Joe? Who's Broadway Joe? Right? It used to be just hand off to the running back. It was like glorified rugby match, right? And it's also, if you look at like hockey in the Bobby Orr era, it was just a slower game. I mean, just a different game. All right. So a couple of the other stories as we get going. And I look at, again, you look at the things when there's no big news breaking. And we just had that really sad, terrible, could have been so much worse. And yesterday, thoughts and prayers still go out to former Franklin Police Chief Bradley Haas. Remember, officially yesterday, we dedicated part of my show last week to him, killed at the Concord State Hospital. But, these are the times when we need to be talking about mental health and mental illness in this country and anxiety and depression and the whole thing. And we never do until the next tragedy, the next craziness, the next person who's off for his or her rocker, if you will, goes out and hurt a bunch of people. And we don't talk about it. It's the number one issue, the number one health care issue that we ignore. And why? I'm still not sure. I know, unfortunately, we need to remove the stigmas. There's too many stigmas attached whenever we talk about mental health. But more families are impacted or affected by mental health, anxiety, and depression than anything else. If you look at any other common denominator on the health side, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, accidents, overdoses, even addiction, mental health, number one by far. And we still, and I'm not going to get into this right now. I really am not. We still jump up and down over viruses, and 'tis the season, and there's this respiratory virus going around and another form or strain of COVID, which there always will be. There's always something. And we spend all this money on stuff like that and scare the what out of people. Stay at home. Don't get out. Stay at home. Work from home. Put your head under the covers. All we do is scare people, but we don't talk about the real stuff in this country from a public health point of view that needs to be talked about. Mental health, number one. More families. Might not be you. Might be someone you're married to or you're with. Might be a kid. Might be a parent. More people are suffering from some degree of mental health, anxiety, and depression than anything else. The number one thing is our mental health well-being in this country, and we don't talk about it. And then every once in a while, sad to say, whether it was Lewiston, Maine, or the other day at the Concord State Hospital, but believe me, that could have been so much worse if it wasn't for the heroics of Chief Haas and that state trooper there doing their jobs. Could have been so much worse. But you look at Lewiston, it happens. Burlington, Vermont, it happens almost every other weekend. We don't talk about the cause of the root. And what's worse is sometimes these people that hurt a bunch of people, to me, it's not about the weapon. And that's what politicians like to do. They always want to jump right to the weapon of choice. We don't talk about the root. We don't talk about the fact that if you go back to the suspect, the person in the Lewiston, Maine, it was known to his family, his son, to the Army, to officials, to the police, to everyone that he had severe mental health issues, and it was getting worse. We knew it. Police went and talked to him. We saw this if you go back to Florida and that Pulse nightclub shooting number of, many years ago, the worst, was it 49 people? I don't know. I can't remember the victims. And that was a person that they had known about ahead of time, kind of lost his mind and become radicalized for ISIS. Whoever, Mateen, was that his name? I think I'm right. The suspect. We have, young people, people of all ages, and we don't talk about mental health in this country. And yet it's the number one issue that affects most families. So how kind of unintelligent is that we don't talk about like the real problems, the real issue? And we'll spend billions and trillions of dollars on a pill for something, and we don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about what we need to do. How do we, who talks with people? Who gets to the bottom? Who finds out if someone's going to be a threat and hurt a bunch of people? Until it happens, until that ticking time bomb goes off, we don't talk about it. And we need to, and we should. Again, another major miss. But it just bugs me when I'll hear a big story or a big push, get your shingles and your flu and your COVID vaccine and all the money behind that. And yet we don't say, hey, not feeling well mentally today, anxiety, depression, getting the best of you. Here's some help that's available. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. And certainly in the veteran community, we don't talk about it. We still have too many veteran suicides. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about the resources available. We just don't talk about it. And you know what? It's inexcusable. It absolutely is inexcusable. And that's why in January, I'm not going to tell you the date yet, but we are doing a special focus on mental health and addiction in this state, in this country. And we need to do a better job. We have our good friends on a lot from the Granite Recovery Center's Eric Eckberg on talking about this. It just goes right over everyone's head, and it affects more kids. And by the way, I'm just going to say, because a lot of people don't want to talk about this, one reason why I get so down and so I lost my trust and confidence in the CDC, Center for Disease Control, is not only Fauci, who became, it was all about him in the end. I don't want to get into this, but the remote learning for kids, we made the mental health, anxiety, and depression far worse for young people. We kept them remote learning too long. And so many kids, as they quote unquote say, are on the spectrum that need in-person learning. Well, there was no reason at all, none at all, for them to be at home that long. And we enhanced the anxiety and depression. We created more mental health. And you know what? These are young people. We should be ashamed of ourselves. These are young people that are going to have to become teenagers and young adults dealing with a lot of these issues that we as a country, we as a society, our national and state, our guardians of these kids made their mental health issues worse by policies that were absolutely unnecessary. And no one has formally apologized. No one has come out and said, hey, I was in this position. I was overseeing this, and I'm sorry. We allowed special interests to run the day and ruin the day. I'm sorry that we've hurt so many young people. What? Nothing. Crickets. 603-228-2080 comes some commentary. Come back. We'll talk with one of the Republican presidential hopefuls who's doing pretty good in Iowa in the caucus state before the New Hampshire primary. Back on Good Morning New Hampshire, the Pulse of a Nation in a moment.